And the webinar is recorded. All right, hello everyone to this wonderful webinar on the next climate conference. We are still waiting a little bit for participants to drop in. Sorry, you also started a bit late, but I think waiting, well, we waited for a good webinar. For myself, at least, I look very much forward to it. Let's wait one more minute and then we start. Okay, maybe we can start now. So, welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for joining. Thanks a lot for our guests, Kathrin Henneberger and me, Michael Bloss. We are co-hosting this webinar. Kathrin, you are in the German Bundestag as a Green member and a long-term activist for global climate justice, and I'm in the European Parliament. Also there from the Greens as a member, also active for global climate justice. I will be in the delegation to the next climate conference from the European Parliament. And yeah, we wanted to have this webinar to discuss what is on the agenda there, but also discuss the current climate crisis that we feel in Europe right now, but actually it is felt all around the world, and it's huge costs, of course. And in the next climate conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, we want to discuss this. We want to discuss about loss and damage. So like all of these costs that are that come from the climate crisis caused by industrial countries, and how can we contain the costs and how can we create some justice? So that should be the topic of this webinar. I think it will be very interesting. Kathrin, tell us a little bit about our great guests that we invited.
Thank you, Misha, and welcome to everyone. So I'd like to welcome our guests. It's an honor to have you. And a warm welcome also to Ineza Umohoza Grace, Alpha Umar Kaloga, Rachel Simon, and Jennifer Lee Morgan. Alpha and Jennifer, they are still in other meetings, so they will be there in some minutes. And I would love that our guests will introduce themselves now a little bit. Ineza, would you like to start?
Yes, I can go. Thank you so much, Kathrin. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Ineza Umohoza Grace. I am an eco-feminist, impact-driven actor in the climate change sector based in Rwanda, and I serve as a global coordinator for the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, and I'm also part of the Rwandan NGO called the Green Protector, where I serve as a chief executive officer. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Rachel, would you like to continue?
Yeah, and thanks also for the invitation to this webinar. Really pleased to be a part of it. I'm working at Climate Action Network Europe, which is a network of over 180 NGOs working on climate, energy and development across Europe. And we're also part of Climate Action Network International, which is a global network. I myself focus on international climate finance and the EU's climate finance commitments.
Thank you to both of you. So my first question would also go to Ineza. Why did you form the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, and what are your demands? And a specific why is the demand of a loss and damage finance facility so a key essential point?
And just, Ineza, just before you start, just let me quick explain to our participants just how this whole thing works here, the technical things. So, well, first of all, thanks. It's 188 people already in the webinar. It's great. You have a Q&A function down there at this bar, and you can basically put your questions there. And later on we try to also take on these questions and put them to our guests, so don't hesitate to use this function. yeah, it will be recorded and probably will use your forename, so you might consider when you write down your question. But yeah, please use the question, not the chat. The chat is between you, but the question is for us to understand what you actually want. Sorry, Kathrin, for short interruption, and just wanted to let this know out to our guests.
Ineza, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So for me, to answer that question, let me use a story because I love story. So I grew up in Rwanda, and at my very younger age, I was faced, I have that memory of waking up in the middle of the night to save my life. I was woken up by my mom when I saw that intensive rainfall associated with wind destroyed my house ceiling, and my bedroom was a bit of a lake. So growing up, I grew up in a peri-urban area, and I kind of forget about that event. It was until I finished high school that I saw on the news, and I saw that a particular area in my country, women and children were forced to move because there was flooding and erosion in their area. Their houses were being destroyed. And I was having a dream to be a pilot because I was good in mathematics and science, but seeing that on the news reminded me of that fear I had, and the fear of not knowing exactly if I'm going to see tomorrow, if I'm going to be alive, and seeing that it was still existing after a couple of years, I was curious to understand what is the reason everything is happening. So because for me, depending on the news, it was natural hazard. It was like something that would be happening every 3 or 4 years. But through my studies, I studied environmental engineering in the University of Rwanda. Then I learned that we were living the effect of climate change. And climate change, first of all, is a concept that is not really fully explained to young people. So learning that we are living in something that is being caused by climate change, so I was curious much more to understand what is that climate change. Because I'm very privileged to be based in a country such as Rwanda, where youth inclusion in climate action is not tokenistic. So I was invited to go to the first conference of party, like the conference where we're going to have solution on climate change. So on my biggest surprise is that when I stepped in the room where loss and damage was being discussed, like the impact of climate change were being presented. So on my shockness, first of all, there was not enough representation of young people in the room. And second, there was no women. And third, the Global South community was not represented. So stepping out of the room, I came with the colleagues and friends, and we were just simply asking ourselves, what is going to be the solution? What can we do? Because the scope of the impact is quite enormous, but we don't want to play victim. We can play part of a solution. So through those discussions, that's where we started the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition with the simple vision, which is to create a borderless partnership between youth from the Global South and the Global North to demand and take action on addressing loss and damage. Because it was clear for us that loss and damage is the current injustice that we are living, and we don't have to fake it or pretend it's not existing, because everyone everywhere is exposed. But unfortunately, youth or the community in the Global South are much more exposed due to the series of injustice or level of imbalance or not having adequate representation in the rooms that happened throughout the years. So Loss and Damage Youth Coalition started in 2020 when we were living the COVID. And to be clear, loss and damage was existing within the convention when it started. So technically it's been more than 100 years that people know what is loss and damage, even if they have a different way of defining it. So for example, look on what is happening right now in Pakistan or in Sierra Leone or in Nigeria, and recently in Canada, because I heard that this past weekend, Canada also experienced a very very intensive storm that destroyed houses and causes destruction of infrastructure. So yes, loss and damage is the intergenerational injustice that we are facing. And it's costing our youth future to an extent that we are not even able to understand yes, because we are the generation that is living in the era that have never been recorded before. So we are having extreme weather event. We are having, everything is extreme to us. So the loss and damage is costing our future, destroying our home, increasing the inequality in achieving sustainable economic development, amplifying the imbalance of power in the global spectrum, and affecting our health and well-being, affecting our food, education, and so many other factors. So as Loss and Damage Youth Coalition on the road to COP27, so our demand is straightforward. So we need the loss and damage finance, and we need it now. So we launched our Loss and Damage Finance Now campaign last week on the Loss and Damage Action Day, because we learn through different papers and research that the cost of loss and damage on today's youth and children and future generation is incalculable. And the economic cost that we are having, or the financial cost, is around more than 200,000 billion of US dollars. So what we need is to see an establishment that is going to be a little bit beyond, and like 1.5 trillion. That's the number that is out there, but is not yet fully, I don't remember where I read it, but it's the number that's there, because we want this finance to be new, additional, and accessible, especially to the frontline communities that they're addressing loss and damage. And also in terms of this facility, we also want to see a proper mechanism that is going to equip the countries to be able to communicate their needs and their demands on action to address loss and damage. The reason why this mechanism is important is because loss and damage is defined differently depending on the community. So for example, some communities are dealing with sea level rise, more pronounced, and others are dealing with drought, and others are dealing with cyclone. It doesn't mean that a community impact, one community is not important than the others. That's why having a mechanism that is going to allow each community to communicate what's their need and what's their action they need to address loss and damage in their own context is really important. And last but not least, we really want to see an active youth inclusion in all the process to taking action to address loss and damage. And the youth inclusion is not tokenistic, because currently youth, we do understand the past mistake, but we are really ready to be stakeholders in creating today reality in a manner that we are able to have tangible hope and concrete action to protect our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ineza. And now we also have Kaloga here. Well, very much welcoming you, Mr. Kaloga. Not sure you can actually speak and unmute yourself or put on the camera, because I also know that you are on the way still, but that it seems that you are not yet responsive. So we can maybe.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
You can hear us. So can you also like answer some questions right now, or should we wait for maybe 5 more minutes and ask someone else before?
Yes, I think I will drop in now, and then until I'm in the second round, I will be available. I will be in the secure line. So sorry, I apologize for not having a video call and the secure line. So you can proceed if you wish to.
If I understand you correct, then you can give us now short an answer. Maybe you can just give a short introduction about what you are doing as a chief negotiator of the African Group for Loss and Damage, and then describe to us how the negotiation process is happening. Do you think it's a fair process? Are you on equal footing with the industrialized countries? And yeah, basically, what's your demand? What are your demands for the upcoming climate conference in Sharm el-Sheikh?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think this year is a very important year for Africa. It is an African COP, and that we like to label as an implementation COP, an impact COP, and my name is Alpha Kaloga. I am from Guinea, lead negotiator for the Africa Group of Negotiators on Loss and Damage. And I think the negotiation has been very difficult in the last year of the Washington International Mechanism on Loss and Damage, because for us, the establishment was a political victory, but the operationalization of the EXCOM, the Executive Committee on the mechanism, was more or less focusing on enhancing the understanding of loss and damage, while our expectation was more or less focused on our expectation was more or less focused on addressing loss and damage. So sorry. Hello. Sorry, I need to keep on. So what I wanted to say is the negotiation is depend on what perspective you see the negotiation happening. From our perspective, it's happening on equal footing, because we as African negotiators, we are well prepared. We try to the extent possible to use African input, African stakeholders, young African negotiators to develop our own perspective. So I have to break in because I got to move, and then I will come back again.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's good to hear already the assessment of the negotiation dynamics. Later on, maybe we can discuss more about the demands. But now, over to you, Kathrin.
So, Rachel, our next question would be to you. Can you explain what is the position from CAN on the COP right now, and how do you work also on the international level together with all the NGOs to influence the outcome of the COP? For example, how do you act on regards of loss and damage?
Thanks very much for the question. Yeah, I mean, civil society is definitely working very hard on the issue of loss and damage, and the need to advance the needs of communities in the front line of the climate crisis towards COP27. In terms of loss and damage, as CAN, we're calling for scaling up of finance to address loss and damage, a decision to establish a loss and damage financing facility at COP27, and the Santiago network on loss and damage is really an urgent priority for us for the reasons that Ineza already outlined. I mean, as civil society that's part of Climate Action Network International, we work together in working groups coordinated by NGOs from the Global North and the Global South to develop our policy asks and our strategies at global level. So we have our working groups on adaptation and loss and damage and finance, for example. But we're also working with other partners and constituencies and youth and mobilizers towards decision makers to do really targeted advocacy and also broader campaigns. So for example, CAN has a World We Want campaign to expose the climate impacts felt by frontline communities and also to show solutions to the climate crisis. Where we are now, we're definitely looking to particular moments in the run up to COP27. So the heads of delegation consultation meetings organized by the Egyptian presidency on loss and damage and upcoming on mitigation and finance. We're engaging in global actions such as that Ineza already mentioned, the Loss and Damage Action Day. And maybe I'll just finish by talking about EU level moments, because as Can Europe, of course, that's a particular priority for us. So we're looking to the European Parliament COP27 resolution, and also the finalization of the EU negotiating position by the European Council and the Commission. So firstly, there's a meeting of EU finance ministers next week where they will adopt council conclusions on climate finance. And then later in October, environment ministers will adopt overall council conclusions on COP27. So we have some really key expectations there, one of which is, of course, loss and damage finance. And we're working with youth and mobilizers, as I mentioned. Just today, we launched a video of youth calling on EU finance ministers to provide loss and damage finance. And we have a number of other activities to try to support the engagement of youth in Brussels with the EU institutions, and also of activists to engage with EU decision makers.
Right, one of the decision makers is now also in the room. Jennifer Morgan, very, very happy that you are here. You are the State Secretary and Special Ambassador of Germany for international climate policy. So thanks that you are here. Yeah, and well, directly the question then is over to you. What is the German approach? What are you trying to achieve in this direction? In the preparation for the COP, but also at the COP. And yeah, what can we expect from Germany? What do you expect also maybe from the European level and from other countries? If you can give us a little bit of an input here. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thanks for including me. It's great to be here with you all. Just back from a week at the UN General Assembly, so with fresh impressions, having spent a lot of time listening to Pakistan and islands, and we all know what's at stake right now. I think maybe first a little bit about Germany's role in the European Union. I think that Minister Baerbock and I we've just been trying to be very active, especially after the last Bonn session, to create space for this conversation and to signal our openness to have it, whether it be through having the Petersburg Climate Dialogue start with loss and damage as the agenda, and adaptation and finance, whether it be through her speech there or her trip to Palau, where loss and damage was obviously a very important topic. And she said there that we're open and looking for solutions for finance inside and outside of the UNFCCC, and engaging, of course, within the European Union, because they are, we're also looking at our own initiatives and what we can be doing there within the Foreign Office. But and I think the Global Shield proposal, which some of you may have heard of, which was put on the G7 agenda, actually was mentioned in the Chancellor's speech in New York, is really trying to fill some gaps. It's not trying to do everything, because I think this is a multiple complex problem that needs different approaches depending on what we're talking about. But the Global Shield is really trying to take a systematic approach to identifying what are the needs, doing country mapping needs assessments, and then what are the responses, technical know-how, financing, insurance, how to pay for the insurance, and to basically try and take out all of the transaction costs in the middle, which take countries too long, and sometimes they don't even have the capacity to deal with. So trying to do that matchmaking and move that forward. And we're working with the Vulnerable 20, the V20, who are very supportive of it, to raise funds for it, to get it moving, to shape it. So, and I think Germany within the EU has been very active in sharing our thinking on it, and that the EU needs to position itself in a progressive way on this topic. And I think last week in New York that did happen in a number of different settings. So looking towards to the 24th of October Environment Council, I think that's what we're looking for the solutions or the language there, and then to evolve it. But we're working very hard to join join up with the most vulnerable countries on loss and damage, but also on mitigation. And I think, if I may, I think it's very important that the loss and damage focus is there. But my plea is please not to forget mitigation. We don't hear much about mitigation from civil society right now. We hear much more about loss and damage, which I understand, but there are actors, there are countries in the negotiations that want nothing to do with having to mitigate more. We all need to do more. We all need to do more. And I think some of the major emitting countries, they want the focus elsewhere. They don't want it on mitigation. And we need a decision that sends a signal on renewable energy and energy efficiency. We need initiatives that scale up renewables around the world. We need a mitigation work program that actually delivers. So, and then finally, maybe just to note, my role is going to shift a bit on loss and damage. The Egyptian presidency asked me and the environment minister from Chile if we would be the co-facilitators for them for the negotiations on loss and damage. So I will be more in a listening role, trying to think through how to find solutions that brings us forward. But Germany will still stay active, obviously, as well. Back to you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, and maybe just to explain on it. So on the 24th of October, it's that the European ministers, they basically make their position on to what they want to do at the COP. Just for maybe some of those of the 186 people here that don't know yet. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So you will be the facilitator, but that's a very important role, I guess. You're in the end writing it down. So interesting. Kathrin, over to you.
Yeah, so Misha, I would love to know from you, because the EU voted last year against the loss and damage finance facility at the COP. And can you tell us maybe if there's a change of heart at the European level? Or do we need more countries like Scotland and Denmark to go ahead and just put money on the table? So what are you currently doing at the European Parliament to push for loss and damage?
Yeah, I think it's definitely needed that we have more countries, Scotland, Denmark, others that are just going forward. So that's basically showing it's possible and breaking this dynamic where every country says, "Oh, we cannot do it because the other ones are not doing it." So that's really great that we have that on the European level. So that's a little bit the thing. The COP is part of foreign policy. So we unfortunately are not doing in the European Parliament the policies for the positioning of the member states. The member states do it themselves, as Jennifer Morgan said on the 24th of October. Yeah, there is this general notion in the room that it will be difficult. But I'm sure there was now a new German government, so there is a new dynamic. And what we do as the European Parliament, and what was mentioned by Rachel before, is we are writing down our position, our demands as the representatives of the European people to the member states. And we are currently in this process to write this resolution, which we will be voting next week. Yeah, we hope that we bring actually this demand in, that there should be some loss and damage facility and Europe should actively support it. So that's one thing. Another thing, but also as Jennifer just mentioned, we also believe that, I mean, basically, the Paris Agreement says you should stay much below 2 degrees and aim for 1.5 degree. And currently, we are not at all going in this direction. Even if you put all of these claims together, you are still above 2 degrees. So, and the European Union is also not willing yet to increase their climate targets. So, in order to be like a role model on the international level and say, look, the EU is doing more, so maybe others can also do more now. So that's also our second important demand, that the EU is actually stepping up, increasing its NDC. in order to create a dynamic internationally that actually then brings us into this below 2-degree pathway and best 1.5. I mean, we all know how difficult that is. But there needs to be movement now, because it's almost only 1 month ahead of the COP, and if there's no movement now, then nothing will happen. So that's of course our second demand, and I think it's also possible. Cannes just had a really nice study that said 60% is already possible with the current policies that we are putting in place in Europe. So yeah, that's the second thing that we are doing. And Kathrin, how's it on your side? What's going on in the Bundestag? What are you doing there? Also, maybe you can already discuss a little bit the whole human rights angle of this COP, because it being in Egypt, that's also pretty important.
Yes. So in the parliament, in the Bundestag, we are still preparing also a resolution. But we are still in negotiation with our coalition partners, but we are right on track. So what we are trying to do as members is we convince other members of the parliament that we need a loss and damage finance facility, and that we act together on that. So there will be also a public hearing about loss and damage on October 12th, for example. And also we are, of course, working closely together with the Federal Foreign Office. So for me, it's also very important, especially as a member of the parliament, to prepare about the topic of human rights in Egypt, because there are currently tens of thousands of political prisoners in Egypt. And if you are a journalist or an activist in Egypt and you speak freely and you are active for human rights, also for gender justice or for the freedom of speech, you have to fear repression. And so it's very dangerous to have, of course, to have the COP in such a country, because the COP should be surrounded with the possibility to protest freely, but this won't be possible. And also we are afraid that maybe during the COP, the regime will play nice, but after the COP, they will arrest everyone who spoke up during that time. So we should not only be speak up during the COP about the human rights situation in Egypt, we have to be aware also after the COP about the situation and stay in solidarity. And currently we are also trying to organize something like a parliamentary observer, so that we, because Micha and I, we will also be in Egypt, that we can use our voice to speak up, especially if something happens to activists. And so if something happens, you can also write to us and or phone us or speak to us, because we will be there, and it's very important for us to use our privilege as a member of the parliament. But I would love to ask Rachel, because how civil society is also preparing for a COP in a country like Egypt, and how is the participation of the civil society even possible?
Thanks for the question, Kathrin. So yeah, I think it's important to say first that participation at the COPs and the negotiations has already been an issue, particularly for civil society, but even delegations, particularly from countries in the global south, because of barriers around travel, visas, accommodation, which was experienced last year as well. And this year, civil society are already facing such barriers, including hotel cancellations and huge price hikes. But to go specifically to the Egyptian context, the world needs more social and climate activism. And so I wanted to express solidarity to Egyptian civil society and all the individuals and media who face restrictions or incarceration when their work doesn't align with government priorities. And it's really important that as civil society, we continue to raise concerns about the shrinking civic space and the situation of environmental and human rights defenders in Egypt and around the world. but taking the lead from Egyptian civil society. So I can share in the chat a couple of initiatives coming from Egyptian civil society in the form of petitions, and also highlight that just last week, the COP27 coalition was launched, and this is organized by civil society groups from Egypt to Africa and the Arab world, in order to really try to bring in voices from those countries and the global south in the coming climate talks. So you can see via those links the various kind of calls to action, and a global day of action they're calling on Saturday, November the 12th. In terms of being at the negotiations, I think as civil society, we have to think creatively about how to try and bring in voices of those who are excluded, but without putting them in danger. And yeah, be really careful not to instrumentalize those voices and not forget about them after the COP, like Kathrin mentioned, but to continue to speak up and out, and advocate to the EU to engage with the Egyptian presidency on this issue through its bilateral diplomacy, its programs, and via the UNFCCC. Thanks.
Just will there be actually a protest at Sharm el-Sheikh, like, or is that not yet clear?
I'm not quite clear on that because I have heard different things about a designated space outside, but in the case that that's not allowed, it would be the usual process of civil society having to seek permission to put on actions within the official venue.
Okay. Jennifer, what does Germany do to protect well, the climate activists, civil society members, and not only at the venue but also like afterwards when the international circus is gone? So what were you, or what is the German government doing?
Yeah, first of all, I just agree very much with what Rachel you said. I think what we have been doing since I got here in March, and I think even before, is raising two linked but slightly separate issues with the Egyptian government, also at the highest levels. One is the human rights situation, and how this is a moment where Egypt should show that it is going to implement its human rights strategy, and that it has an opportunity in front of the world to demonstrate that it's going to change. The second, which is incredibly important, we all know, or I think if we didn't know beforehand, we're learning where Egypt is on the list of human rights violators. The second is really around NGO access, and there, Minister Baerbock and I have, and all of the state secretaries in the Foreign Office have been pushing both the ambassador here, but even more importantly, Minister Shukri and his officials on this. What they have told us, but actually I've asked my team for an update. So Rachel, this may be coming your way on what the situation is so that we can go back in and talk to and raise it again. I mean, what they have said in public here in Berlin is that protests, and to me, is that protests in Sharm will be possible. It should be just like it was in Glasgow. That's in Sharm. I was pushing for beyond Sharm, of course, because and had a dialogue with the government about why in Germany we really welcome protest, and also protests from other countries, not only German protesters, but protesters from other countries. On hotel costs, on visas, on space, on who gets allowed in, all of those things. So, I plan on following up with that, based on the experience of what's coming in, which I'm hearing is not good from everything that you're saying, Rachel, but also other information that I have. So I think we just have to stay on it. And I know that there are also, our embassy is very active there. We're also looking at how we can give a voice in our pavilion to activists who are not given visas or not allowed to travel. to Sharm so that their voices can be brought in if they want them to be. And then kind of investigating with foundations and others, Open Society Foundation, on, you know, how to support people after we leave. But we have to stay on it all the way through and all the way after.
Thank you so much for that information. So I also would love to talk about the inclusion at the COP and Ineza. So I think we all agree that women are some kinds of global agents for change, but at the same time they are also on the front line, as we now see in Iran, but also they are least in decision-making structures. And also the structures also of the COP are sometimes very patriarchal. So why is it just so important that the COPs are inclusive, and especially that women also of the MAPA regions have influence on the ground?
Thank you so much for the question. So as someone who defined herself as an eco-feminist, this is a really a good question. So for me, the reason why I think women it's mandatory for them to be actively engaged, first of all, is because they are the holder of what is going to be a light of hope or a light of knowledge to the next generation, because they're the ones who are on the ground pretty much longer time in facing the climate change impact. And when you look on how the world is structured, whether you want to look on policy level or businesses or any sector you want to pick, women are most of the time left behind, especially when you start with education. So having women being included is a way to cut all the unnecessary inequality that exists on the social level, but also offer them to really share insight, because women are the one knows pretty much many things in terms of how they can adapt themselves or how they can protect their family, especially when we're talking about family. So hence they can put on valuable insight in the decision-making process. So when I started the negotiation, I was following gender. And then I was part of the the negotiation on deciding the gender action plan in 2019. So having that action plan on gender inclusion that is going to be resonative on the ground level, on the national level, international level is really important, because it's also allowing to gain a number of other actors who are committed and were motivated to really be action taker on the ground. But unfortunately, even the gender action plan right now is having issue because it doesn't have the finance that is needed to be really robust as it should be. So that's why I like to share some time when I have the opportunity, like what the country is doing. Yes, we want international solution, but we also need to be reflective on what each country can do in their own scale. Because once a country, for example, like Germany or like Uganda or any other country can really step forward to really paint what does it mean to be gender inclusive in taking action on the national level, international level, it can serve some of the blocking discussion that is happening that is diminishing the value of women. And this is really important in this era when we are living loss and damage, because when you look on the global scale, women are much more vulnerable, especially young girls in the global south, to face much more impact of climate change, because they're going to be left out with the, because most of the time they're into the, I don't know how to say, like in the position of being powerless in taking action and decision or what really matters for them in that event. So which for me, I think is really important for being active listener to what women need, what youngers need in action to reduce loss and damage, and then reflect on what a country, a specific country can do in advocating in the right path. And then by that is going to be the one way to really get a momentum on international level, because right now it's not going in the right direction. So it's still in the left side, if I would say. So you need to be on the right side. I don't know if I answered your question, but that would be what I would say.
No, but connecting on this question of actually, does it go into the right direction? There's now these fears of like this global fossil rollback. You know, like everywhere, like companies are trying to invest in Senegal for new gas drillings and so on. So I wanted to bring this question to Mr. Kaloga, because you're out of security line, I heard. And I think your camera should be working as well if you want to turn it on. But as you said, you are in Senegal right now. How is it being received, these attempts now, for instance, to develop these new fields in Senegal? How are civil society actors thinking about this?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not quite sure whether I'm entitled to talk on this issue on behalf of civil society in Senegal. I do have followed the discussion, however, with some friends of mine who are very concerned about this important issue. You know, I think the question is, how can we help developing countries to reduce the opportunity cost for the just transition? The question is not, I think, whether the civil society will agree or not, because there is a development pathway. There is an issue of accountability of politicians that need to be in a democratic way to deliver. And climate change, even it is felt by people here, the scientific rationale and the narrative that is connected to fossil fuel is not that disseminated. So the question, in my point of view, is how can we take advantage, how can we harness the technology available in developed countries to allow developing countries at least the incremental cost for the renewable energy to take that. Because at the end of the day, in my point of view, and frankly speaking, the right to develop is very important to us. I give you an example from Guinea. You know, all the crisis that is happening here now, and we have just an increase of 2 cents. And those 2 cents on the price of oil was triggered a civil unrest. And we had two causality, two people who died in the process of protesting the increase of oil. So the question is, in my point of view, how can we, as a global community, help developing countries, and particularly least developed countries like Senegal, like Guinea, to take a pathway that is consistent with the 1.5. And that requires a global effort. It's not only what is happening in Senegal, because the world is interconnected. It is a systemic approach we should have, and solutions should be available. So, because if you go to the Senegal government today and say, okay, why are you not using the wealth of your country in terms of renewable energy? They will say there is issue about the battery, there's issue about the affordability, there's issue about the accessibility to those renewable energy. And that has to do with technology transfer, that has to do with intellectual rights and all these things. So my question, I think the question is very important, and the civil society is taking a leadership role here in disseminating and in stimulating a strong discussion about the pathway in terms of climate resilience and low carbon development for the very legitimate development of Senegal. But at the same time, this civil society is powerless in terms of a dynamic, in terms of the needs of a country, in terms of providing options to the government to take or to avoid this pathway that is unlocking us in fossil fuel. I hope that answered to your question.
Absolutely. So you say basically, okay, I mean, what's then the other possibilities of development, and possibly these resources are not in Senegal, but somewhere in the industrialized countries. But yeah, that's good that you are here and that we have also people from the industrialized countries in the room to discuss this question. But okay, we first finish some of the questions we had before, and then we go into this discussion. I wanted to bring Rachel in again. Just as a general, like if you now look to the COP, what are your general expectations, and what needs to happen in order for it to be successful? And can you just give us your general expectations, especially with the look into loss and damage?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, with so many negotiations on different agenda items going on, I wouldn't want to call the success on we have to see it as a whole range of issues that we need to progress on. But I did indeed want to comment on the area of loss and damage in particular, and then also touch on the mitigation side. I mean, coming into COP27 and looking at the broader context of climate finance, we have to acknowledge that the failure to deliver on existing commitments, the 100 billion, and the balance in mitigation and adaptation finance is a scandal. And that providing that climate finance, the majority through official development assistance budgets, and in some cases in the form of non-concessional loans, which have to be repaid in full, is also a scandal. So we really need to see developed countries actually delivering on their climate finance obligations, because that's a really important context for loss and damage. I mean, even if all the even if all the development and adaptation costs were met, there would still be significant levels of losses and damages. But it's important to emphasize that some of this is because of those adaptation and development finance deficits. So maybe to comment on the EU in particular, I mean, we know that the EU collectively is the world's largest climate finance contributor. And I think for that reason, it should be setting the direction of travel for climate finance flows, ensuring those commitments are met, using its political weight with others, as well as scaling up its own finance. On loss and damage finance in particular, I mean, I think I've already mentioned, but we're really looking for the scaling up of finance to address loss and damage, and the establishment of that loss and damage finance facility at the UNFCCC. The Santiago network operationalization, and it will also be really important to see loss and damage anchored in the new climate finance goal, which is being negotiated, which will replace the 100 billion after 2025. I think, I mean, it was interesting to hear about Jennifer's comment on the global shield, which we don't have so much clarity about yet, but I think really important questions about any kind of interim measures to scale up loss and damage finance while we wait for a solution at the UNFCCC is this finance accessible to vulnerable communities, women and girls? Who's paying for it? I mean, perhaps subsidized insurance can be one part of the solution, but I don't think that frontline communities should be paying for damages that they're not responsible for. It's also really difficult with insurance to have it addressing slow onset extreme weather events, and also are communities equipped to kind of, are they financially literate, and then can they get easy access to the finance? So that's really just to emphasize that the UNFCCC, rather than the G7, should be the place for the development of an appropriate global response and oversight on loss and damage, because of developing country participation in governance and scrutiny of observers. And just to finish briefly on mitigation, I think we're also really keen to see a mitigation work program that works, as Jennifer mentioned. And really importantly, as Misha also mentioned, the climate and energy legislation of the EU that's being revised right now. It's important to see the institutions pushing for as much ambition in the finalization of those different pieces of legislation over the next months. We expect that some impacts from Repower EU could increase that level of ambition to almost 60%, as Misha mentioned. But there are also really worrying signals in terms of, for example, waiver of do no significant harm principles around uses of ETS allowances, and financing for fossil fuel infrastructure. It's also really important that that climate and energy package answers to international commitments. And so when it comes to revenue generation from carbon taxation, in the case of the CBAM and the ETS, there should be shares of that finance going into international climate finance. Thanks.
Just one comment. Today we had our final meeting with the negotiators on the ETS and the additional finance for the repower. And we have a very big majority that says we will not put additional CO2 into the atmosphere, but we will just take it, we front load it. So the overall climate integrity of the ETS, at least what we want as the negotiators, stays intact. So maybe small good news. We still need to get this through Parliament, and then with the Council, it will be interesting.
So before we go to our questions in the chat, where there are a lot of, I also want to ask Ineza one last question. So what would be a good COP, in a good outcome of the COP from your perspective? And if you have any specific also demands to us, industrial country of the global north, that would be amazing.
Thank you so much. So for me, the ideal COP will be to see the establishment of the finance to address loss and damage. So whether it's named as a facility or funding arrangement or any terms that may come up as we are approaching, but we just want to see a certain amount of money put it on the table in a process that is going to be transparent, accessible, and new, in addition to existing commitment, that is going to help countries and community be able to address loss and damage in their own context. So that would be the idea, idea COP, like the outcome. And second is to see the operationalization of the network on addressing loss and damage. So this is something that is really crucial, because it can serve as a way to also inform how this facility is going to be able to fit the need of the community on the ground. So seeing it also operationalized is something that is really crucial, and something that I personally looking forward to. And the demand that I can talk to like the global north countries. So first of all, to start with the EU. So the Loss and Damages Coalition, we did send an open letter to the EU So we are really patiently waiting for a response, because we believe that we are in an era where we are able to work with all stakeholders to come up with a common solution to our global and common crisis that we are facing. And other thing I would just like to ask is for everyone to really be open to speak the truth, because now more than ever, the reality is in our eyes, and we can just choose. We have two choices to make. So you can either play the victim. By victim, it's just to acknowledge that, oh, this thing, the loss and damage is going to be enormous. There's no going to be a solution because we are dealing with decision that was there in 1992 or way before I was born. So even if I do make a change, it won't be much, because I'll be needing, it's going to be a process, and then we let the problem be there. Or you can choose to be part of the action, where you find your niche, you find your voice that you're going to take forward. You decide to be the voice of the voices community in the rooms that are not present, and associate yourself to really stand to the right side of the history. So the side that is going to be painted as the global solidarity of the world in order to achieve climate justice. Because yes, let's face it, climate injustice is interlinked with so many other factors of injustice, especially in this generation. And by solving climate justice with the open mind and with the ability to stand in solidarity, is going to also allow us to tackle some other injustice that is also existing on this planet. But if we fail to address climate justice, we are all going to die. And I'm pretty sure that no one else wants to die, because we want to have a future for our children and for our grandchildren and for everyone. But if we fail to do so, we are all going to die. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Jennifer, just one question, maybe also a bit more connected to what Mr. Kaloga said before. So last year there was already this climate partnerships. There was this climate partnership with South Africa. Do we expect more of this? And then actually would like to ask Mr. Kaloga, how does he see this instrument of climate partnerships, and if kind of he sees it as something that is then substituting loss and damage, or is that an additional tool? So yeah, maybe Jennifer, maybe you can first present a little bit what Germany is doing and what you are doing in this regard, and then Mr. Kaloga.
Yeah, sure. And I think this part is very separate from loss and damage. I think last year there was an announcement of an agreement with a number of G7 countries and South Africa on a partnership, just energy transition partnership. And those countries have been working with South Africa over the last year to get an investment plan done. I mean, these are agreements that are done in negotiation with the country, obviously on eye level. And it's a new approach for donor countries to actually coordinate, so that a developing country doesn't have to talk with 7 or 8 or 10 different countries, but for us to really look at, okay, how can we be leveraging and finding the financing for a transformation of a just energy transition away from fossil fuels into renewable energy, and what are the key issues that are needed there, and how can we support that? I think there are efforts now underway to have that conversation with Indonesia, with Vietnam, with India, with Senegal. They're all at different stages. They're all very different. And obviously they're not a replacement for other partnerships that can be done as well. I think it's clear that this handful of countries is just a handful, but the purpose really is to try and pool the resources and get the financing there, and also work to have the enabling conditions there so that it can attract the private finance. So, if there is a renewable law in place in a place like Indonesia, that sends those long, loud signals that enables us to be able, and the governments of Indonesia or other countries to be able to leverage the finance coming in as well, the private finance that's needed. So I think those are all ongoing live conversations, trying to work to have some conclusions by the COP. We'll see how far they are. India is hosting the G20 next year, so I think that may be a longer time frame, but there's a lot of interest. And I think we're just trying to see if we can do that kind of matchmaking on a eye-to-eye basis. I think the additional thing is just really looking more broadly at how to scale up renewables and energy efficiency. It's clear that, the financing is not flowing yet the way that it needs to. I think we need a reform of international financial institutions. I think the World Bank is right front and center right now. Because I think of the various regional banks, it has not delivered the level that it should. I mean, there are also regional development banks that are funding more fossil fuels than renewables, including in Africa right now. But, and that needs to be combined. I heard I'll talk about kind of the tech transfer for that. That's the partnership that needs to be kind of forged. What are the barriers for it happening, and how can we address those barriers to get it to move? So I think that's quite different than, say, working on loss and damage. I mean, I hear you, Rachel, on the global shield. It's really being done with the B20. And it's, we wanted to go to the G7 so that the G7 were a bit on the hook. But it's only filling one part of the picture. It needs to be much broader. And I would say it needs to be broader than a UNFCCC, because there's so many, if we're going from prevention all the way into loss and damage, there are so many components there, including, and I'm curious, I mean, it would be debt cancellation, debt approaches. Barbados has been showing a lot of leadership there recently. And anyway, that's a different topic, but I just wanted to mention it because I think for countries that are deep in debt, it's something that we're looking at. It's a finance ministry, Bundesbank topic in Germany, but fully understandable from where countries are coming from.
Okay, thanks. There's so many questions in the chat now. We wanted to turn to them. It's a bit of a challenge to group them well, but maybe with the reply to this, how Mr. Kaloga, you perceive this climate partnerships, but also maybe you can answer this one question from the chat, which I really liked. Some scientists asked, like, what can they actually do? Is there something that like scientists can do in terms of, for you to better understand loss and damage, or have like better scientific communications with it? So maybe this question, what do you want from science, and what could help you? If you are still there. Yeah, you are. Good.
Yes, thank you. Just one thing, I think the latest report of IPCC was, from the African perspective, one of the comprehensive one, and this has also shown how far and how Africa is how Africa is vulnerable to climate change, and I think the support provided to African research and scientists to make research on very African like issues like drought, flood, sea level rise has been a good input into the IPCC report, and I think I will very much encourage scientists to further work with universities across Africa to help them work on the narrative that is specific to Africa, because we need that to show more evidence-based. Having said that, I think also it is important to have a strong discussion on the loss and damage outcome in Sharm el Sheikh, and I'm very pleased to hear that someone is being selected to become, that Jennifer is becoming one of the co-facilitator. So I think this, my point in addressing these audiences is to make a short summary of what we are expecting from African perspective in terms of loss and damage outcome in Sharm el Sheikh. For us, the minimum outcome in Sharm el Sheikh is to have a Santiago network that is operationalized with a network that is demand-driven and enhance country ownership by enabling country to have a mechanism to avail themselves and not being at the subject of organization bodies and network that will propose technical assistance from their technical expertise, but rather to help developing countries and African countries to undertake meaningful risk assessment and risk assessment that is generated and motivated by national priorities and so on. So a very operationalized Santiago network also means a clarity about its funding. We have the experience of a climate technology center network that is doing a lot of strategic work, tapping into different funds and stimulating innovative solutions like how to avoid unlocking in fossil fuel in developing countries, but cannot provide more than the resources provided. So we would like to avoid that, and a clarity about how Santiago Network will be funded in a sustainable manner is very important. On the Glasgow dialogue, I think at the outset, I would like to say that loss and damage is a non-sorrowable, is not a sorrowable, it is a non-sorrowable event. The narrative that insurance can solve the solution is a very limited perspective from Africa perspective, for different reasons. And one of the reasons is there are no economic losses that you can ensure. I don't know how you can ensure not material things, and the insurance become not viable with a scale of at country level. If you are talking about 10% of GDP, I'm not quite sure which insurance company will be able to do that. The Africa group is very keen to work and to discuss with colleagues on the loss and damage funding arrangement. And we do support the proposal made by the G77 to have a discussion on loss and damage funding arrangement. But from our perspective, I think because loss and damage financing is very important to us, we want to make things right. So it is, in our point of view, as far the discussion is evolving in the group, a bit early to say that the outcome should be a facility perhaps in the role of facilitative work, mobilizing different areas like humanitarian work, disaster risk work, and the MDBs and bilateral in that sense, because of the magnitude and the scale of resources required, a facility can be understood. But we seriously think we need to discuss about the form, the principle, because this is a very avoided discussion, and it's not about liability only. It is about justice. It's about climate justice. We have precedent that is happening. I give you an example of South Africa, where we have this flood happening. And I have colleagues telling me that relative of them can no longer secure their house. Those are private people, because the insurance company is saying, now given the impact that is happening and the projected impact that is foreseen, no one can afford to pay those premiums. And I think even developed countries with all the goodwill will not be able to do that. So we need to have a serious discussion. How can we address that? And we also notice that loss and damage is happening in developed country, and it is going to move on, and it's going to increase. But from our perspective, there's no institution, neither under the convention nor outside the convention, that can address loss and damage finance. And we also think that we need to find a solution that goes perhaps beyond the UNFCCC. So, driven by the UNFCCC principle, but we need to have a strong discussion at the UN level, because debt is a big issue. We have the issue of infrastructure. We need to have a solution that is comprehensive enough. So sorry for taking a lot, but I felt that it's very important to convey those messages that the Santiago Network, we accept that predictable, sustainable resources is clear, and a regular replenishment process to the Santiago Network is clear, and Santiago Network discussion is very different of a loss and damage discussion funding arrangement. And on the loss and damage funding arrangement, for us, it is important to have the principle, the form, and the function clear to discuss about the architecture. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Because we only have 10 minutes left, I want to ask the last question also from the chat, and also Micha has the last question. So for me, it's also very important to find ways to act with the fossil fuel industry. And also for me, it's very important to think about solutions how we can include the fossil fuel industry also to pay for loss and damage. And so I would also love to your thoughts on that topic, especially with right now we are discussing a discussion. There's a huge discussion about the windfall profits and how we can use windfall tax also for loss and damage or for climate justice. And also my second question would be, how can we end the influence of the fossil fuel industry? This was also a question from the chat. How we can, because also in the COP, but also every day in the German parliament, the fossil fuel industry has still a huge impact. And so we need to address also this topic and to talk about how we can internationally stop the influence of the fossil fuel industry. And Micha also has a last question for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a really nice discussion. Sometimes it was also very technical. So there was one question in the chat, which I like, just also because maybe it's good to, it's a bit more broad. And maybe Rachel, you can answer. Someone was asking, why are we discussing loss and damage? I mean, we are on a pathway to a lot of tipping points, and why are we not only discussing about decarbonization? So maybe maybe a little bit provocative after having discussed for 1.5 hours about loss and damage, but maybe Rachel, you can also go for explain this. Another question I think was coming up. I think Ineza mentioned it in the beginning. She spoke about this 1.5 trillion. A dump in the room, and maybe just to Jennifer, why can the industrial countries not put that number, that money on the table and say, yeah, actually it's correct, 1.5 trillion, that's what we need to do. So maybe yeah, these questions, and then Jennifer, the last questions in the chat, they are from Kalino Roshakov. I think she's a journalist, so maybe it's about the question, can you support the initiative by Vanuatu? Maybe you can also explain that a little bit. And then, yeah, it was very interesting discussion already. I'm looking forward to your to these last answers, and we finalize it.
Okay, yeah, and thanks again for the invitation. It was great participating. In terms of the question, why are we focusing on loss and damage and we should only be focusing on rapid decarbonization? I think if you were to look at the perspective of someone who's already experiencing dangerous climate change and the numbers of people who are losing their lives, livelihoods, and cultures already, and who have been for many years, then you would definitely understand the focus on addressing loss and damage now, because only addressing mitigation is a strategy which could be called, in fact, a racist strategy, because it's essentially protecting the interests of those countries who right now are less affected by climate change and who have greater capacities to deal with climate impacts. So I think that's why it's really important we focus on loss and damage now and really try to advance discussions that have already been going on for many, many years, led by frontline communities and countries in the global south, but which have been consistently blocked by other parties from progressing further. And it's not only a focus on loss and damage, we need to do both, of course, and strong and urgent action on decarbonization is essential. I think the two are really complementary, because decarbonization and focusing on the phase out of the fossil fuel industry can also help you generate revenues and finance for loss and damage. Thanks.
Jennifer. I think you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was using the wrong mouse, too many devices. I mean, I think, so I think Rachel's talked quite a bit about why not only decarbonization, but I also appreciate, we need a massive transformation, right? I mean, and so in this midst of this horrific Russian war, stepping into it to phase out fossil fuels and phase up renewables and energy efficiency. I mean, this disruptive moment, this is the moment we should be stepping into that and doing that across the board. But knowing that the impacts are already happening. So I won't say more on that. I think on the 1.5 trillion, I think that governments, one of the other jobs I have right now is with the Canadian Environment Minister to do a progress report on the 100 billion delivery plan. It's quite clear that it's really unacceptable that that has not been delivered as of yet. And we're looking at, okay, what's been done last year, what more needs to happen, et cetera. I think that, there should be, I guess my view is, yes, there needs to be more public money. That's clear, and the priorities need to be set. But we also need to be leveraging all the finance. I mean, we haven't talked at all for Paris Agreement Geeks 2.1c. This is a very important article in the agreement, which is about going from the billions to the trillions, aligning all the financial flows to be climate resilient, to also be funding the solutions, not the problems. And I think that's something that we're looking at for the COP as well, in order to achieve the numbers that we need. And on the Vanuatu initiative, which is basically looking at bringing something to the UN General Assembly this session to request for an advisory opinion on the International Court of Justice on the obligation of states in respect to climate change. We're in active consultation with Vanuatu on this, and finalizing our views on it. I think it's quite clear that island states and other vulnerable nations are in a situation that is untenable, and we need to be doing everything that we can to support them. Or just looking at the final language, et cetera, and seeing what we can do. Thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much for coming. Maybe the last question goes to Mr. Kaloga and Ineza. so from this discussion, what you heard, is it making you like, are you looking forward to the COP? Do you think it will be positive? And if there's like these maybe two things that you think that really need to happen at the COP, what would be the two things that really need to happen? Maybe Ineza, do you want to start? Yeah, perfect.
Yes, I can. So first, I do thank you for this opportunity to be in the space. This discussion were quite rich in the sense that I'm still excited to go to COP27 because it's going to be an opportunity to mark something that's going to be like mark a decision or mark a step that we are going all to be taking towards to achieve climate justice. Because now I believe that we are on the same page. No one is denying that loss and damage is important and is happening and need to be addressed. So that is the kind of message I'm getting. And I hope that this kind of eagerness to take action is going to be the same spirit we are taking to COP27, and we are going to actively listen to what especially Global South negotiators are demanding in what makes sense to address loss and damage. So that would be what I would say, because I don't want to take so many minutes since we are having 1 minute left. So thank you so much for the opportunity to attend.
Yes. I would also like to thank you for the opportunity. From our perspective, the COP is a very important event because it is the only way that for Africa can remain in the driver's seat when talking about global crises such as climate change. Other fora are not representing us to be part of a solution. So COP is a very important event for us. In terms of expectation, I think the Africa Group has always been saying mitigation is a key priority for us. If we are talking about loss and damage today, it is because in the past, we had a very recognized failure by developed countries, by wealthy nation to take strong and meaningful mitigation actions. So one of the key outputs that we can have at COP27 will be sense to have the developed country comes with clear and consistent mitigation contribution that is consistent with the 1.5 and also in light with their historical responsibility. The second point is we need to see in a granular manner how the doubling of adaptation resources are being provided. Because I remember Guinea was chair of the G77 last year. One of the deals we made in terms of Article 6, not requesting more share of proceeds, was that developed countries doubling adaptation resources. Otherwise, we will push for more share of proceeds. And now there's no clarity about how much have been provided and the nature of those resources provided, including the financial instrument that are being used to provide adaptation resources. So we need clarity about the doubling of adaptation as promised by developed countries in COP26. We also would like to see concrete plan on the discussion of the long-term goal. Ineza mentioned the 1.3 trillion that the African Group is putting forward. We think that discussion should no longer continue about intellectual discussion. We should talk about the number because it is about the quantitative collective goal. So let's be frank and have a frank discussion there. And from the African perspective, the implementation COP means clarity about finance, clarity about adaptation resources, and of course, clarity about mitigation that give us the assurance that the effort that we are doing in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation, in terms of avoiding the opportunity, for instance, to use our natural resources for the world, that it is very recognized. And the lastly is loss and damage. And I mean, loss and damage is, as I indicated, is no longer an issue of risk. It is a daily reality. The risks are already being considered in our national economic and social strategy. So the discussion in Guinea, for instance, about our 5-year plan, we talk about, residual impact of climate change. So loss and damage is at the center of the discussion. Loss and damage should be recognized as a fourth pillar of the UNFCCC because of the failure by developed countries to take meaningful mitigation actions. And secondly, loss and damage should have an agenda, a standing agenda item. We should have a standing agenda item that will not only talk about loss and damage finance, but about the science and what the science is saying. Because to me, there's a connection between the decarbonization and loss and damage. And loss and damage can be a strong narrative to encourage those people, or those countries that are a bit reluctant in terms, or that are in a difficult situation to take meaningful mitigation action, to recognize that actions now is better than the future. I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you for your time and also for your knowledge. I hope that we all learned a lot from each other. And I think for me, it's now more clear than ever that the next COP has to deliver, because we have no time for another COP and another COP, or like in disaster, like in Copenhagen. And so I think that we will stay in touch. I hope that, and that we will see each other again in Egypt, and also that we are building a strong alliance globally for loss and damage finance facility. And so thank you very much for being here today. And I wish you all a very good evening. And thank you also to Misha for organizing and to do the best part of the moderation. Okay, bye.